Welcome to Let's Talk Cardano, presented by the Cardano Foundation. In each episode, we delve deep into the transformative world of blockchain technology. Join us as we explore how blockchain is reshaping industries from finance to supply chain and talk with some of the key pioneers at the forefront of this revolution. All right here on Let's Talk Cardano. In this episode, Igor Mikhalev, partner and head of emerging technologies strategy at EY Parthenon, joins us to explore Web3's impact on capitalism as we discuss decentralized ownership, data empowerment, and building collaborative, purposeful ventures of the future.
You obviously have a large track record of innovation. You're with EY Parthenon right now.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your Web3 journey and how that emerged?
Yeah, so I'm with EY Parthenon, which is a strategic arm of EY, running my own business as a partner and focusing on Web3, permissionless business models. Mm-hmm. And this journey started with my accepting of the fact that Web3 tech is coming in, and also my desire to make this world a better place, maybe like many others want. Mm-hmm. And I call my journey Capitalism 2.0. So that's the journey towards more equitable, more fair economic system.
Okay.
Right? And what are the qualities of that? Well, it is the decentralized distributed ownership. It is distributed governance. Mm-hmm. It is the power of data being put back into the hands of consumers, right? Because the platform grip, so to say, is something that really wrecks our economy currently. Yeah. So I think for me, Web3 is, in the first place, a way to transition towards that Capitalism 2.0 future, as opposed to make a quick buck and do all the pump and dump and whatnot, right? So that is what the journey to Web3 is for me. And I've been there for a while in my previous job at BCG and with my own ventures. And I'm doing my best now to try to concentrate the findings, concentrate the learnings, and make it more impactful and empower people with what I know, empower people with what I do. And the number one goal probably for me is to help people find their nature with that. And I think as people, we are so much willing to be treated fairly, so much willing to be expressing ourselves on a higher level. And I think we have a chance now to use that technology for good, for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting in the blockchain space specifically, right? There's a lot of collaboration happening, and we obviously call this very frequently the trustless environment. Yeah. But it's still, it's still operating in, having mutual trust towards each other. And I recently heard somebody say, instead of survival of the fittest, we should call it survival of the friendliest. How do you experience the collaboration in the blockchain ecosystem?
Times change, and this blatant obsession with pumping projects and investing just because you can do it algorithmically and you can step out the next day and earn some money. I think, times change, and we proceed towards more, let's say, enlightened, more aware type of collaboration. Exactly as you said, it is, and it's remarkable what you said, because you said, hey, from survival of the fittest to survival of the friendliest. And to me, I call it the transition from competition to collaboration.
Yeah.
How much longer are we going to compete with each other and just try to benefit individually, and in the process keep wrecking the planet, keep wrecking our economy, keep wrecking our psychological and emotional safety? How much longer? And I think now we as people have a chance to actually change that. And looks like, at least I'm the big optimist, I'm a big believer in that, looks like the foundational technology and also the foundational thinking are well in place for us to start creating sort of islands of that collaboration. Because I think we as humanity, in the face of adversity, should finally be able to collaborate. Otherwise, the hope is lost. And I don't think we want that.
Yeah, exactly. So you think that these islands of collaboration will essentially be emerging properties that will, essentially take over the world?
Well, call it take over the world or change the world for better. right? So you can think about also transition from like old money and the grip of platforms towards perhaps the new money and more of a collaboration, right? If you think about the traditional industries and how the winner takes all mentality is in there, how we have big platforms that occupy the disproportional majority of the market share versus what we have now in Web3. Looks like in Web3, the situation is more harmonious. And we already see that, the distribution of share is more even compared to traditional industries. And that really gives me hope. And it gives me a lot of confidence in the way that we're moving in the right direction.
Okay. So, obviously more and more people are joining the Web3 space and, there's a lot of innovation happening. Can you share some learnings that you would give to somebody that would want to create their own venture in this ecosystem?
The number one thing that you need to start if you think about the venture in a Web3 ecosystem is how are you really making this world a better place through an application of Web3 technology? So how is your business model rewiring, rehashing, reimagining the way business is done currently?
Yeah.
So don't think about blockchain as something you sort of apply as is, because it's just going to be more expensive and it's going to be slower and it's hard to sell. Maybe you can raise a little bit of money, but then it's useless.
Yeah.
Think about it from the perspective of rewiring and rehashing of the existing connections within the certain business ecosystem that you're trying to address.
Yeah.
So that is critical. And the elements that we discussed, like returning data, power of data back to users, is something that must be there as a foundational component, because Web3 venture building in general in Web3 is, there must be a component of good, right? And component of good is what the technology gives us an opportunity to build. So for example, if you want to challenge Uber, build a platform that brings the power of data. For example, in Uber, you have the right statistics to your name as a driver. You have your sort of karma, you have your feedback. And once you've done enough rides, you're stuck in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So why do we not share more? Why do we not give people an opportunity to participate in a platform that gives you the power of your, in this case, riding stats back to you? And, you are partly an owner then, you are paid and compensated for the data that you're contributing to the ecosystem. And you can easily take the data and bring it to another ecosystem and keep riding in there.
Yeah.
And by that, we stimulate innovation. So multiple Ubers can, with lower barriers to entry, enter the ecosystem of the competition in there, in ride sharing and the riding. And also for the people that participate, it is a better place because they can be compensated to the fair amount.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So definitely an element of good here. That's really good to hear. I think it's very interesting when you mention like rehashing or rewiring essentially existing business models.
Yeah.
We do slowly see that more and more companies are actually looking into decentralized applications and maybe perhaps even like SSI, in large part because they don't want to have all that personal data, right? Like it's a very tricky situation to have if you have to deal with GDPR and like have all this information. What do you think are like sort of the biggest maybe disruption areas when it comes to blockchain adoption?
Personally, I'm all set on finance. I think finance has an opportunity to lead the way in showing how disruption is done, right? Because everything is already digital twin is already in place, and the connection between the virtual world and the physical world doesn't have to be established because finance is already virtual.
Yeah.
I think that main innovations need to happen there, and we already have things like stable coins in emerging world that help you to fight inflation and fight local government trying to debase your currency because of all sorts of reasons, sometimes corrupt. So we have an information exchange, and we have situations where blockchain can be used for good to transfer identity information in a way that, as you mentioned, we have SSI and DID, but the question is, as a multiple banks, if I'm using SSI and DID network, can I start relying on each other as opposed to doing that identity verification every time myself and looking at the KYC myself? So that bringing traditional entities together and that removing of older intermediaries and that removing of older inefficiencies and changing the way that industry is wiring those entities together is basically where the innovation is already happening. Right?
You're talking a lot about CBCDs.
Yeah.
Like, what's the, are you seeing those predominantly in emerging markets, or do you see them more in the sort of like traditional markets?
Well, CBDCs is a really interesting topic. I personally love CBDCs and also a bit hate CBDCs. Right? Let's revisit a little bit. Like, why did we have CBDCs? Do you know why we had CBDCs?
I assumed that it was again to hedge against volatility.
Yeah, well, they can tell you that, but my perspective is, when Facebook Libra once came out, and people saw that, well, suddenly a big tech can run, a multi-currency worldwide value exchange network that is outside of the control of traditional regulators and the government. People said, wow, this is really too much. But, we cannot just say, hey, forbidden, never do that. Right? Many central banks said, yes, forbidden, cannot do it, but hold my beer, and in a few years, I'm going to do CBDC. CBDC will be just as good as Bitcoin. It's going to be perfect. So programmable, secure, everything will be fast and cheap. Just hold on. We're going to make it happen. Right? And what happened? Well, not much. So why do I know? Because I'm actually the creator of cbdctracker.org, which is the #1 resource in the world for tracking CBDCs. There's a big community around it, featured in everywhere, got so many sources. And we basically track everything. And from that, the activity, we know that not much happened in terms of tangible real-life deployments so far. So the ambition was huge, but the implementation, the outcome is not so good.
Okay.
What does it mean? Well, it means that CBDCs had big potential, at least the way it was on paper. But in the end, it shows that the private sector probably is the one that will win there, or the one that needs to play there more. Or maybe if you push it a little bit further, maybe the answer is in the decentralized currencies. So maybe decentralized currencies and interoperability between blockchain networks is all we need in terms of CBDCs, right? So maybe CBDCs will be government-issued instruments, liability on a central bank that should exist on chain, on public chain, right? So I'm more of a believer of decentralized network of networks and governments issuing their instruments on public chains, but maybe it will first start with the private environment. But however, I'm pretty sure it's going to all flow towards public chains, because no way you can centralize, orchestrate top-down innovation. Maybe in China you can, but in the Western world, since that we love our opinions, we want to be self-expressive, we want the startups to be going on, that's how we innovate. No way you can innovate top-down and that scale.
Yeah. That's a very astute remark. It never works to dictate what innovation should look like, and it's always it is an emerging
100%.
problem, right? Like the biggest innovations always come from some obscure place somewhere, and then it just sort of explodes on the scene and changes the whole paradigm that we're talking about.
That's right.
So yeah. What you're actually saying is that public permissionless blockchains are the future and not private consortia.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure of that.
All right. Well, that's good news for Cardano then.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you seen any of the decentralized governance that's happening now on Cardano?
So I've seen that the projects that we originally worked on, so Cardano DCF, that has migrated into Cardano Constitution and everything else, gives its fruit to bear. So it looks like it's something finally happening at the big scale. And personally, I'm very excited to see how almost algorithmic government can function.
Yeah.
So I'm like super curious, but super bullish as well on that. Right? Because, for a while we've been saying, hey, we want decentralized governance. But then when it came typically to large treasuries, to big decisions, you often had those negative sum game type of scenarios that people try to self-fund and sort of collude between each other and whatnot. Or you have like only little funding available, or still big entities decide what to fund. Right? And I think you at Cardano, you know it very well. You had yourself, I don't know, you tell me if it was a good journey or not, but you had 3 big entities trying to compete a little bit.
An interesting journey.
It's an interesting journey, right? So I can only wonder what happens when you further decentralize that and more people will be involved in that governance. And I know that Charles Hoskinson has all the good intentions when it comes to the SDGs and, how do you want to, as a community, impact the world? And I think that's perfect. My question is, how do you transplant that goodwill into the heads of people that will be making those decisions? Or how do you govern it in a way that many people can make those decisions for good? Or maybe you can even wonder, do they need to make those decisions for good before they are better off by themselves? So many scenarios are possible in there. But all in all, I think decentralized governance is something that's inherently fitting us as humanity. And I really want to see it working at scale. And I think you guys are one of the pioneers there.
Yeah, I think at least at this scale, I think we're probably the first chain that actually does like actual decentralized governance. And obviously, the protocol is designed in such a way that it's actually possible on a state basis. There's obviously an interesting secondary element to this one, right? Like the current hype cycles in the news and sort of like the ability for having liquid governance. How do you think that will impact a decentralized governance like Cardano, if you want to speculate?
Well, liquid governance and just governance based on merit. That's a good question. I don't think it's solved yet. And also with my girlfriend, she is head of a compensation team in a large tech company. And the question is like, what we're trying to brainstorm sometimes, what is fair? What is fair? And what is a fair share of power that you need to have in a company to make decisions? What are you optimizing towards? Are you optimizing towards your own agency? Are you optimizing towards like your collective agency and collective sort of intention? Do you have to do it prorated towards your own merit? I know Charles likes the concept of meritocracy and how based on merit you empower people and give them decision rights, etc. But the question there is, for me at least, what is merit exactly? So is that when you build something? Is that when you helped to earn something? Is that when you are making a right decision? Is that when you're using your moral bearings more than others? So, I think that's the crux of what is still unsolved for dynamic governance systems to actually start being truly groundbreaking and effective. But I think we're getting there.
Okay, well, it's very optimistic. I think those are good metrics, but probably hard to measure, and that's always like how do you know that a decision was good,
right?
If we're not at the end of time, essentially.
Right. Absolutely, and I think it's a fallacy to say, "Oh, it's all about the money, just connect it with a market outcome." No, because we are changing the world here, and along the way, you're not supposed to earn most of the money in the world. Otherwise, it would be just playing the game right.
That would be Capitalism 1.0.
That would be Capitalism 1.0 for sure.
Exactly. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about Capitalism 2.0 then?
Yeah. So I work on this concept together with the University of Amsterdam.
Oh.
Right. I work on this concept for about 2 years. I have a website called city20.org. This is a for good, for impact, for awareness, for education type of an initiative that I'm running. Not only it is focused on Web3 and traditional business, how do you transform them? It is also focused on bridging the gap between arts and sciences. Because for way too long, we've been trying to say, hey, you have arts, hey, you have sciences. And they're so different, don't look at each other. But I think we have forgotten that there is a role for art in the world of business, in the world of economy. So what is it in those unspoken feelings that are provoked by an artist or art that we could use in our economy, right? What is it? How can we start working in our business environments because we are not forced, because we want to do that? Because originally, as humanity, we developed also from the situations when we had to collaborate around the goal, right? But now it's almost institutionalized that we need to compete and we need to be pressured in a certain situation. So where is that free flow? Where is that willingness to do something because we want to do it and we think it's good for your neighbors, it's good for your community, good for your environment?
Yeah.
I think that is what should be the driving force in Capitalism 2.0, as opposed to sort of being pressurized in thinking, I must earn, I must go to work, I must earn my max, I must go retired, etc.
Yeah.
So that's one of the pillars of Capitalism 2.0, that transition from forced to free action. Next, you have the collective ownership that we discussed already. So how do you transition from saying, well, we have the shareholder primacy, shareholders own everything, and our fiduciary duty is to maximize their freaking value all the time, all day. How do you transition?
Shareholder value.
Right?
Yes.
So how do we move from that to a more harmonious picture where you have also, as we discussed in case of transition from Uber to Uber 2.0, how do we give people a fair share of the data that they gave to the platform to have it create value? How do we give it back to them?
Yeah.
How do we enable their mobility? And how do you enable, through maybe a government action, this type of self-competition between platforms on the level of data and on the level of standards? Because if those standards are enforced, data is available, well, then people are more mobile between the platforms and there's more incentive for new entrants because the barriers to entry is not that high. So the collective ownership is the second pillar. And the third main pillar is, again, those a little bit more esoteric, but from competition to collaboration. So how can you move from blatant competition towards more collaborative type of an environment? And how do you infuse into that process things that we lost along the way, right? So moral bearings that we as people and as early civilizations had, right? So if you look into Confucius and how earlier Chinese philosophies were structured, so you had a spectrum from like moral philosophy towards legalism type of philosophy. So I think we gravitated too much towards legalism, meaning everything needs to be described in concrete terms. And if it's not described, it's allowed or it is something that you don't know how to go about. So, and the virtue is in maximum precision of description so that you can act in accordance to the law.
Yeah.
But this is a massive reduction. This is a massive simplification of how we act as humans. And I think if we only look that way, we are forgetting how to act on the basis of our moral bearings. So that transitioning from pure competition to more of a collaboration and rediscovery of those moral bearings and other type of thinking towards that is the third main principle.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, those are some, very, very strong pillars. I'd be interested to hear your thinking about how do we move from competition to collaboration? My immediate reaction was, how do we incentivize? But maybe that actually defeats the point. And there's obviously like a lot of philosophical work. I think one of the greater examples was a rewrite of The Lord of the Flies.
Yeah,
it was that wonderful research where, the Lord of the Flies is like everybody gets in competition when they get into an island for resources. But they actually found a real life example that is where this happened. And they actually found that there was a lot of collaboration and sharing of resources. So how do you, in the current climate, actually find out how you can move from competition to collaboration?
Yeah. So I have two, let's say, theories here. So the first one is more incrementalist type of a theory. It looks into what we have so far in terms of the antecedents, and those antecedents are, for example, we had COVID. We understood that, well, if we're locked in one room together, or if we are, not considerate of each other as different countries, you have ugly situations that happen, and people discovered a lot in terms of what they have forgot through COVID, right? And next to that, you have also big events like, the war, that let people start thinking differently, a potential decline in hegemony of US dollar and potential decline in American civilization's dominance overall that is kind of in the air, right? So I think those things are the steps, incremental steps that I think lead us towards a more conscious way of doing business and living together. Yeah. This is one. But a drastic discovery that there is a certain adverse event, big thing that is just impeding and impending, and then it's coming your way as humanity will absolutely set us on the path of collaboration. And maybe the climate change is one of those things.
I was just going to say, we'll probably change people's hearts and minds towards each other.
I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe that's a little bit of a dark future, but at least one that will eventually emerge into something good. Maybe as a last question, like, do you have any sort of like future vision that you'd like to share? Where do you see society in 500 years? Let's take a...
This is a wild guess. I can say almost anything now.
Yes. Go for it.
So maybe the number one thing I want us as humanity to consider as we're moving towards the future is what is our goal here? What is our purpose? So I think as any organism, we cannot exist without purpose. But same time, the purpose to just maximize value, meaning companies need to do more EBITDA, more revenue, and governments need to do more GDP. That we discovered is too much of a short-sighted way of doing business and doing our economies, doing our collaboration. So I would call towards rethinking of what our purpose is and include a multivariate, basically, equation, if you will, into the definition of the purpose. So not only, hey, we have GDP and then we have all the EBITDAs under it, and now let's compete, right? But more the externalities, so positive and negative externalities that companies and people create need to be taken into account. And I think inevitably what we will see is that we do not need unlimited growth. Yeah. So if you add equation elements that are not there now, externalities that we create, we will see that optimizing towards unlimited growth is not anymore possible. So we'll have to dial down on our growth and we'll have to consider things that we're not considering as we're thinking about what our best future is tomorrow. So the discovery of that and definition of that goal is what I hope will be happening for us as humanity. And if we are clear, maybe we'll have to degrow a little bit, right? Maybe we'll have to restructure the way we are doing our business. And that's why we have blockchain and that's why we have decentralization and permissionless. But I think that will be the major wake-up call, major awakening for our civilization in the next X amount of years. All
right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here and obviously joining this podcast. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And let's work together on this future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. Cool. Pleasure is all mine.
Amazing. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us on Let's Talk Cardano. For more insights and deep dives into the world of blockchain, don't forget to subscribe and reach us at cardanofoundation.org, where you'll find extra resources and content on all things blockchain. Leave us a review wherever you enjoy podcasts. Follow us on social media and stay tuned for more coming soon.